go. Then, ooh, doing something. Oh, it's back. It actually prompted me to disclaim to you that I'm recording you.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, that's good. I mean, I'm
It's
in favor
prompting
of
me.
that.
Okay.
Uh,
All right.
obviously, I'm here to be recorded, but you don't want people surreptitiously recording you.
No, yeah, it's pretty bizarre. It's just it's unusual. All right. So anyway, today our Carrying Stones and Digging Holes conversation. Ryan Hunter is on the line. Um, we've been talking a lot about the past, the future, and hopium, and kind of some places that that ends up leading us kind of on autopilot. Like we're not really paying attention until we wake up to that fact. So, yeah. So, where do you want to go? Ryan's been thinking about it a lot. So,
Yeah, I mean, this takes us a lot of places. I don't know if we're going to cover everything today, but let's start out with what people want. Happiness, right? It's all about that. I mean, we'll end up talking about, that. We'll end up talking about, the personality, individualism, the cycle of karma, time itself, all sorts of places. But let's start with happiness. What is it? How do we obtain it? Because everything, I mean, we are brought into this consumer culture, this consumerist mindset where everything is a product. Everything's out there on the shelf begging for our attention, begging for us to desire, right? And one thing that I realized, several years ago now, is that happiness is really a matter of, it's a function of desire. The way we understand being happy is about, it's not really a state of having everything that we want. It's a state of feeling like we're making progress toward fulfilling our desires. It's always this, it's this tendency that we have to project our lives out into the future. And, happiness kind of comes when we feel like, there's a positive future coming.
which could also be, part of the programming delusion.
Right. No, it's
and you're falling right into the trap.
It's usually something very delusionary. But it's a way that we keep ourselves, we maintain this state. And when you talk about hopium, right, because that's, again, hope. It's a function of hope. We're hoping to attain, something. We're hoping to achieve our desires. But we're actually drugging ourselves every time. We're just, we keep dosing and dosing and dosing on this fantasy. Whatever you picture the future being will not come to pass. Whatever your image of it is not going to be what actually is. Even if you have a very positive future coming to you, it's not going to look like what you fantasize. So, I mean, this is automatically something delusionary. And we are kind of just inculcated into sustaining this kind of drug-induced, but hopium, yeah. This sort of this mind-altered state where we think that somehow the future is the key, and we live in the future in our fantasies rather than being present in the moment. And that's kind of the key to this thing.
Yeah, no, I see a lot of it when I did a lot of when I was going to school for rebooting the brain to get it in, peak operational manually with the reboot that I do. One of the things we talked a lot about, how the brain works, and they have us so hopped up on left hemisphere and programmed, so we have left hemisphere dominance. And that's where the past and the future lie. It's also where, like you read to children over and over and over and over these books and these stories, and it becomes imprinted into their subconscious, which is also leads them to actually kind of utilize that on how to live their life in the future, to do,
Right.
weird things like believe in, a knight in shining armor, or, what is it? Somebody gets poisoned or put to sleep and somebody's going to come and wake you up. And then we have the whole religious aspect, we have,
Right. The salvationist reasoning.
yeah. And a lot of this stuff is just what the left hemisphere wants, because, it's all about me. It can be on the reptilian side. It's the past, the future. It's
But it
also
also
where,
takes no responsibility for that future that
no,
they desire happening.
well, because that has to happen in the present moment, which is, the omnipresent, and which is more reflective in the right hemisphere that's completely inactive, because everything that they do to us and train us into is to heighten the part of the, let's just say, the psychotic part of our brain, and not allow more of, our ability to think, to be in the present moment. Spontaneous healing happens in the right hemisphere. All the choices that you,
Spontaneity in general,
yeah,
being spontaneous at all.
and that's how you create, right? Is that, so if you're not in the right hemisphere and you're constantly in the future or the past, you're just going to keep recreating it until you die, and nothing will change in your life. And then you'll probably
Wow.
come back and
So
do it
you've
over
already
again.
hit on several things that I want to talk about, but we'll have to take them one at a time. One thing that I have noticed, you're talking about children's stories, like children's stories, fairy tales. Um, I mean, I thought about being like one of my many fantasies that I've had in the past is, writing children's stories, because I kind of came to realize that there's actually a tremendous responsibility if you're going to set something down for children to read, because it sculpts their paradigm. It actually, when you give them a narrative, a story to kind of absorb and really be, if it's a good children's story, they're enthralled with it. They kind of dwell with it a little bit, and it really shapes their ideas about what the world is. And I'll give you an example, which I think is a good children's story, but it was my favorite when I was very young, is Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince, which is, kind of a much more open and circumspect kind of view of reality than what you get in, say, the Brothers Grimm or something. But even so, it shapes your paradigm, your understanding of the world that you live in, going
Well,
forward from.
think about like how normalizing, something like, what is it, Hansel and Gretel, where they, are in the forest and they see this, mirage of candy house, right? There's candy everywhere and yum yums, and they get kind of under the spell of, let's just say, like a drug, right? They're being drugged, right, with all this candy and everything else, that they don't really see the woman who lives in the house, that it's a potential trap. And then what does she attempt to do to them? She puts them in an oven to
Mm-hmm.
cook them, right? So think about how normalizing that story is when it comes to a lot of the things that are going on today with kids being kidnapped, kids being trafficked, kids being sacrificed, kids actually being cooked. A lot of this spirit cooking is really hard for people to understand that it's going on, that they cook people and they cook kids and they eat them. And here we even have a fairy tale that normalizes people and children to this theme. I mean, any
Well,
normal person that would be operating in like a high conscious vibration, or in a potential of thinking with the whole brain, would say, "What the hell is that? My kid is never going to read that. That is the craziest thing." But it's normalizing. I love one of the
well,
things that.
and yeah, the weird thing. Okay, remember the beginning of Hansel and Gretel, where the father has to like send the kids off into the woods to get rid of them. Um, yeah, it is a really creepy story, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you think to yourself, like, what parent in their right mind? I was kind of raised a little bit different. You know, I read a lot, but I was pretty active in sports growing up. So I didn't really start doing a lot of reading until my teenage years, and then it was pretty open. So, I found crazy books like about the Antichrist, and, not, I mean, like books about ball, and, fiction. And I read a lot of Carlo Castaneda and Gene Roberts, who channeled the Seth. I read a lot of crazy stuff in my teenage years. I think it just kind of imprinted me a lot different. But even though, I did have, quite a bit of fairy tale syndrome, like that I had to kind of, work out at a certain point in time, about this, savior, programming, somebody coming to save me and somebody coming to take care of me. And, like it's going to be all right. At some point you'll be rescued. But think about, like, I have a quote here. I'm just looking it up, and I use this quote a lot, but it's it's from Don Juan Matus, who was the instructor of Carlo Castaneda, and it says it perfect in one paragraph. And the predators who operate behind the scenes, of course, they would create fairy tales that are in alignment with them and their behavior, to normalize things that shouldn't be normalized, like putting children in the oven and cooking them.
Well, and
And
I
this,
suggest, yeah, okay, finish.
yeah, and I'll
So,
just throw this paragraph quote out there. It says, "In order to keep us obedient, meek, and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous manner. Stupendous, of course, from the point of view of a fighting strategist. A horrendous maneuver from the point of which of those who suffer it. They gave us their mind. Through the mind, which after all is their mind, the predators inject into the lives of human beings whatever is convenient for them." Don Juan Matus. And so everything around us is all that. They're injecting what they want us just to readily accept without fighting them.
right. So, of course, the predators, what he's literally referring to there are what are called the flyers, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Um,
That's a whole
and
other, thing, but yeah.
well, yeah, and it trickles down. Um, but let's take a step back and think about the overmind of the flyers, the which we've talked about in the past. The tyrant. I want to actually use the Greek term for the purposes of today, Chronos, Father Time, the deity that dreams this reality into existence, right? The false god, the imposter creator, who dreams this reality as an illusion, as a trap, like that candy house. I suggest to you that this whole metaphor of Hansel and Gretel, the witch, is Kronos. It is exactly the tyrant who has created this whole reality that we think we live in out of thought, right? Through the foreign mind as a signal, which we decode into what we think is the reality surrounding us, which is a false paradigm that, well, for one thing, teaches us to live in the past or the future, which we know are actual. They don't exist. They're illusory. Right, the future obviously doesn't exist. There's no experience there. We have to fantasize it into existing. And like I said earlier, that's never going to match the fantasy that we create. But the past is also not real. And the past is kind of like those children's stories. It's a story, it's a narrative, it's a lie, which we tell ourselves in order to account for our inexplicable presence in the moment. It's a story that we tell ourselves to define who we are, which is something that we use to limit ourselves rather than expanding to what we truly ought to be. And so the past kind of dictates, again, who we think we are, what our personality is. And this is another thing that I've, kind of stumbled onto, several years, almost a decade ago, is this notion that we get of who we are through our history, through our past, and the history of fantasies that we have projected into the future. Because it's not just, every moment we have this ever-evolving fantasy of what our desires are and what it would be like to fulfill them and live in our dream life. And all of that sculpts who we think we are, and then we play up to that. The thing is, we actually try to be ourselves. We put this effort into being whatever version of ourselves we think we ought to be, which is actually less ourselves than if we didn't put any effort at all. It's a funny thing that the harder you try to be yourself, the less of yourself will show through. And if you want to be the consummation of what you truly are, you should just be spontaneously, and you will be much more you, a much better version of you than you could ever contrive to be on your own. And so that takes us back to the tyrant, Kronos, this whole system that is based on thought, right? Mind control. Because what happens is the tyrant and the flyers, what they ultimately do is they control the units of meaning that we use to construct our reality. They control the little chunks, the minute thoughts that we think correspond to some reality. And of course, we piece together some kind of paradigms out of those units. But if those units themselves are faulty, then we're not going to ever hope to come up with something meaningful. And an accurate interpretation of reality has to come through something a lot more fluid and a lot more expansive than the units of meaning that we're given through the foreign mind. But these little chunks of meaning that are supposed to be, you know, very solid and very static and just like building blocks for your prison cell, they're a function of contrivance. And we've talked about this before, heaven and hell. The reason, right, heaven is nature, hell is the human world, heaven is spontaneity, hell is contrivance. And this is what we do. We wall ourselves in and we limit our lives by trying to contrive everything. And that is the signature of Kronos, the tyrant. So this type of thinking where we're trying to contrive our reality, trying to control the future, deprives us of the moment where we can actually live. And it walls us into this very limited sense of who we are and what the world is. So let's go to karma, because that's kind of what it is. As Alan Watts always said, karma is your doing, right? So karma, well, the way I like to think of it, okay, so I'm a Taoist, right? And to me, karma is a function of just kind of the projectivity of our minds and our reality. So it means that every action, every thought, every attitude, all the elements of our paradigm follow through. So everything that we think or feel about the world circles back around and comes back to us projectively. And so any type of stance that you make will carry through and fulfill itself. And in some sense, that's what, you know, people would like to talk about, the law of attraction or whatever. It's the same thing as karma. It's the same thing as all of these ideas. But it's not the way we use it in this world is as a trap. We're falling for the tyrant's trap every time, because we make this posture toward reality, which then, you know, reflects it back to us. It carries through, and we experience all of the consequences of whatever that is. And then it becomes a cycle that we get trapped in. So the cycle of karma and the wheel of time are exactly the same thing. Are you with me?
I am.
Okay, good. I got suddenly scared that the call had been dropped, and I was just talking to myself.
No, I was actually, you know, I was thinking, you know, like, you know, I think a lot about karma, and, you know, and a lot of the, it's always interesting to me because a lot of the people, you know, that live in this world, you know, and they kind of make stuff up sometimes about some of the rules that occupy this world. And, you know, there have been a lot of people, including, you know, Don Juan Matus and some other people, who didn't really like this world, right? Didn't really like the rules of engagement in this world. And, you know, left us, you know, popcorn trail in order to kind of, you know, hopefully maybe figure it out, you know, work on our own individual freedom. But
Popcorn trail or a breadcrumb trail. We're
yeah,
back to Hansel and Gretel.
we are. Just circles around back to that. So maybe life is just you in an oven, you know? Maybe you're just hot and sometimes you're cold. No. So so I think a lot about like karma, and basically, you know, it's kind of like the law and attraction, because, you know, in this world there's like a kind of a rule, the law of attraction, which, you know, what you do will come back to you. You know, and a lot of people in this new age kind of belief systems, you know, have this twist on it that it's, you know, the law of attraction's only positive. But I see the law of attraction operating in a very negative way because of what people are attracting to themselves. Because that's, you know, that's kind of like the auto setting for this world, you know, like you're getting what, you know,
Right.
the auto setting would be. So,
Oh yeah.
and so like people don't realize that, you know, they may have done something like 10 years ago. You know, they ran over, they were, you know, flying in their car down the street, weren't paying attention, and hit and killed a dog. And that same karma or law of attraction comes around and someone hits your dog, right? Or you are the dog that gets hit, right? Because this is how this energy, you know, circulates back around. Because the past becomes the future.
But it doesn't have to be an action, right? It can just be it's a pattern of interaction with your reality, which can be a thought, it can be an attitude, it can be anything.
Oh yeah, no, a lot
And
of those things affect all of it, especially if the thought turns into an emotional, you know, response.
right. So but there is a twist on it. And I like what you were talking about, the automatic what did you say? It was the like the auto mode
The
for this
auto
reality.
setting, the auto
Yeah, exactly.
setting, the
Yeah.
presetting.
Well, because the auto setting for this reality is what Chronos makes it. And let's forget the name Chronos for a minute. Let's use Saturn or Satan, right? Because in addition to being this deity of time and thought, well, let's actually reason it through a little bit. So we've talked about before, time is an aspect of thought. Without thought, time doesn't exist. And we were kind of exploring that a little bit too, because the future and past are only thoughts. They don't exist in reality. And so what genuinely exists is only one moment. It is just now. And that isn't time. There's no chronology there. So thought creates time. Thought also attempts to create order out of randomness. And so Saturn or Satan is the god of order. And in that sense is the god of, you know, structures, hierarchy, crime, and punishment. And this is really kind of the nature of the reality that has been set up here. So what happens is, and I'll probably my standard name for this being is the tyrant soul. That's probably what I'll end up using mostly. Is so being the god of crime and punishment, the tyrant is kind of like the police, kind of like a spider spinning a little web to trap you into. It's not a matter of, you know, ultimate justice and, you know, creating a better world for all, as we like to delude ourselves into thinking that the government and the police are there to do. But it's a matter of, you know, what we call entrapment, right? We even have a term for it. When the police do it, it's called entrapment. where they kind of spin this little web. They manufacture the crime and try to pull you into it or get you to somehow make some small admission which will allow them to, trap you in their web. And right, they're spinning a story, which is a lie, because all stories are lies. The truth is manifest, but when we open our mouths, or when the lies come out. And so this story, whatever it is a manipulation. It's a fabrication that becomes a manipulation in order to get energy out of you. It's you have to curse yourself, right? You and I have been talking about this too, because okay, the structure of what we call the government, it's all based on finance, commerce, and it's all, it's supported by finance. It's all based in commerce. And then, of course, it extends out through force, coercion, into legislation and the judiciary, right? But all of that legalese and all of the financial languaging is founded in basically the Talmud, is Jewish word magic. It is a specific form of black magic in which the practitioner tricks the victim into cursing him or herself. And the reason for doing this is because then they can proceed with whatever malicious intent that they have without getting the karmic backlash. They're shielding themselves because you have confessed to doing whatever, and therefore they have the right to, throw you in a cage or whatever it may be. So, again, getting back out to this larger view of karma, it's still a trick. It's still this entrapment scheme whereby the tyrant and his system are trying to manipulate you into a spot where you say, oh, mea culpa. And that's their opening. They're like, oh, I'm wrong about this. And you may be trying to be open-minded, trying to be teachable, but that's the whole thing is
well, I think,
when you open up.
I think that, I see so many people who, that I've tried to help, with like shamanism work and stuff, and they're just so under the spell. And because of the osteopathic work I do, I take people back through their timelines, right, to unravel what needs to be healed, right, and then keep opening it until it finally responds, right, and the memory, the trauma, whatever is in there, the spell kind of is released. And I think the fact, you think on some levels, like, we could look at the Matrix and, like how they have to kind of rebirth people kind of in a fluid, right? So they kind of have to pull them out of the system. There has to be like a second birth, right? Kind of a birthing into, I don't know if it's the wake state. I really hate using those kinds of terms. But a lot of people are so cast under spells, so many different levels of spells, that most of them have accepted. I mean, this is why, when you look at a lot of my grandmother, she was a real prophet at the Pentecostal church. She also was an exorcist. And it's why, people have so much, like we could call demonic activity, because they're under so many different spells. It all started from when they were a fetus, when they became a being in this world, that attachments and things, it's almost like being in that fluid coming into this world is almost like a magical spell, like the initial one that you suffer from. Because think about it, if you were really an enlightened being with omnipotent potential, then when you came into this world, you would come with all the memories from the billions of years old that you are. And so the big magical spell is when you go to sleep, when you are put asleep and then you are put into a product of spell. The spell's cast to make you think that you are operating a body, that you are trapped in this body, that you are in this world learning something or whatever else that it's going to be. So the initial step is the spell. It's almost like, think about how many fairy tales are sleep spells. Eat the poison apple. What beauty, Sleeping Beauty, she pricks her finger, doesn't she? And poisoned something. So all these, and then you have all these things with this children, like Rumpelstiltskin. I'll give you gold if you give me your kid. Hansel and Gretel, parent abandons the kids in the forest, and then the witch tries to eat them. So you're going to also, the second spell is the abandonment of yourself, and then the abandonment of your children. Third step. So then you have this, spell, a layer of sleeping on top of a layer and layer and layer of sleeping. But there's this really great story. Let me just tell it real quick. I was doing it. A friend of mine knew some people that had bought a hoarder house, but the person who had been, they died in this hoarding house. It's like, north of Reno, way out there in like Red Rock area. And the woman who lived there was involved with, let's just say, developing not so positive magic, right? And then hoarding things. And then some of the cats she was hoarding, ended up dying in the house. And there was, some speculation that she was sacrificing the cats as well. Well, anyway, they gutted the house out. A friend of mine, he's been involved with a lot of stuff with me in the past because he's a contractor, and he's, opened up land on properties and released things that have attacked him, broke his back, thrown him downstairs as he was like building a brand new house on the property. So whenever he ends up in these places, he always recommends that people contact me. Not so much to clean up the mess, but kind of figure out what's happened there. And then I put together medicine, earth medicine from nature, that can actually help to change the vibration of that vessel, the house, which will usually get rid of most things that may be there. So when I got the call, made the appointment to see the people, the guy was white. He was like in a, gut it, and then him and his wife were going to fix the house up and then, move into it. But it had a lot of these crazy problems. And his wife decided that she didn't want to come near the house because of all these weird things that had been happening. And then upon getting there, the husband hadn't gotten there yet. And the woman, she was actually Filipina. And she was about my age at the time, in my 40s. And I remember us just sitting down on the step. And she said, so you're going to kind of release, what's here, so it'll be safe. And I said, well, let's just see what happens. Let me just see what you've got going on. And she went into this whole thing that she was raised in the Philippines by her grandfather. And her grandfather was a medicine man. And his big thing, something had happened to her parents, and so he took care of her. But people would come to their house, right, that were under spells. And he would release from the people. She said that she would look around the corner and see what he was doing when she was really little. And she said that, for example, this young woman had come to him, and she kept gaining weight. And she was like very fluidy fat, and very unusual to see these kind of people in the Philippines. You don't get that heavy, So she said, you could tell that there was like something wrong. She said, so my grandfather walked around her, kind of poked her here and there, didn't really talk to her, was sizing up, whatever the situation was. And he said, you have several layers, you have several, structures. That's a word that we kind of use sometimes in shamanism, because we will create structures, to shield, to develop, to create energy. We like to create structures. I've created a lot of energetic structures in my time. So he said, you have a lot of structures that have been developed in here that, are causing you to die, and that you're basically drowning inside your body. And so she said, then, he yelled something, and then he put his hand into the energy field, and he like grabbed onto something in her chest in the energy field, and he pulled it. And she said it was like a plug, like, if you had plugged the bathtub, right, with a plug, and then you're pulling the plug out, and then all the water can drain out. But in the moment that he pulled his hand out of the energy field and unplugged it, she said there was a huge splash of water that came off of this woman. And there was all this water all over the floor. And it had fish in it. It had shellfish in it. It had all kinds of stuff that was live and flopping around on the floor. And so she was really glad, that I had come to help with the house, because that's how she was raised. She was raised with a medicine man who predominantly released people from different kinds of structures that they were born into, they were developed into systems that they believe, and in some cases you've bumped up against these things from other people and collected them. But I always think, if people could really see this stuff like that, like reaching into your energy field and unplugging, then, within seconds, all the water in your body leaves your body, and you lose, 40 or 50 pounds. And you think about, like, being submerged in water, underwater, and you can't hear anything, you can't see anything, and you can't tell what's going on. So sometimes I think, like, the original spell that was cast was the one where, I did so much shamanism a while back that I even started to wonder if the memory of me being born was real or not. And that maybe in a hospital setting, and maybe that's what they do to people, you think you're pregnant, because these are all the things that people do, right? These are just the things you do.
Right. Well, they're stories, so they're not real.
Right. So,
memory is just a delusion, just like we were talking about.
So then you think about health. So why do you have cancer? Why do you have all these things? Because it's, it's a setting. It's an auto setting.
You've been manipulated into thinking you deserve that.
Yeah, or that's just part of your life. I mean, for a long time, I really hate those people. I hate those people. They're Jude's Hospital for Children. I mean, that place is just a research center to do research on your children, and you think that, they're actually helping them, and they're doing it for free. And there was this one commercial on TV, and it said, 1 out of 5 children will have cancer. Thank God for St. Jude's. And I was like, wow, is that programming or what? So if you have, maybe if you just have 4 kids and you stop there, that you won't have one that has cancer. I mean, talk about, predictive programming and programming the population that, why should any kids have cancer? Let's just ask that. No one should have cancer. right? Unless you really, really want it and you're conscious of that. But,
Right.
it's like all this predictive programming, the spells that they cast in a language while it's running in the background into your subconscious mind, you just expect these things to happen. You just expect to get married. You just expect to have children. You just expect to, buy a house and have a 30-year mortgage. I mean, talk about a spell. You want to live in the same place for 30 years, and no matter what happens in your life, you have to pay that damn mortgage.
I want to jump back, though. I want to get back to this idea of karma as entrapment, and actually, okay, so we're getting massaged on all sorts of levels, like you were talking about, through our thoughts, our kind of subconscious thoughts, to accept that, oh, this is the way it is, or somehow you deserve this, or because the nature of the tyrant, again, crime and punishment, but remember that he's the false god. He's the imposter creator, which these Western religions worship, right? I mean, they have the story about God and Satan, and there's the good one and the bad one, and they pay lip service to worshiping one, but with all of their thoughts and actions and deeds, they're actually their whole energy is going to worship the malevolent one, the one that imposes this bullshit structure and makes everything into a bullshit lesson. And that's the whole thing about karma, is it's always contrived to be, oh, well, this is a lesson for you. Except, and it goes to, like, think about the tractor beam. I want to take it to the next level of, why don't we remember our previous experience coming into this world? Or, these experiences that people, claim to have had, where they went into the light and had people, either, listing off their various sins and whatever, or somehow convincing them that they need to come back in order to develop more and learn more lessons. When in fact, all it is recycling our souls through the system in order to drain us further and further of our energy and our personal power. And that's what the tyrant consumes. That's his food. And that's the point of the whole system. It's bleeding us dry.
Yeah, and pretty soon you won't exist at all, even on an energetic level. Like it will bleed you, even your soul or your ISB or whatever you want to call it will no longer exist, because they also use that for their systems as well. I mean, they attach, money onto us. They copyright that stuff and they actually generate income on top of it as well. But if you're billions of years old without the body, well, I mean, people don't really get this in their head because they think they're here to, like you said, to spiritually evolve each lifetime. I'm here to do that. Well, you were billions of light years old before you even got here. So what would the point of this madness teach you anything that you don't already know?
Well, and the Indians and the Hindus and the Buddhists get it. They get that the karmic cycle is something they're trying to escape, not that they're trying to complete their lessons. They're trying to get the fuck out of here.
That's exactly what all their practices are about. Even like especially Tibetan Buddhism, they practice their entire life to run the 90-day gauntlet through death once they pass through it. And then they even have people chanting certain kinds of songs to let them know where they're at in that process so that they can, run the obstacle course to make sure that they're not captured into the light, the tractor beam.
Mm-hmm. So, but this is, like I said earlier, the the karmic cycle is the same thing as the wheel of time. And when I talk about, breaking your chronology, and well, I guess I haven't probably said it in terms of escaping time, but escaping the narrative of time, right? When you get a broader, more expansive view of time, then you no longer have a chronology to cling to, right? Your life is no longer a story. It is a collection of moments that you can't necessarily string together in one linear sequence.
Yeah, well, that's what happened, when I started doing, when I got really serious about traditional recapitulating, when I had brain cancer. And once I started, moving through huge periods of my life, there are whole sections that are no longer present anymore. And it's interesting because I'll run into people and they'll be like, well, don't you remember who I am? And, we were really close friends in high school. Remember when we did this? And I'll be like, nope, that part I've recapitulated, because guess what? It was a story that was sucking the life out of me. And I actually had to stabilize it and get it into the present moment. And now it no longer exists.
Right. Or, you've shifted probability streams enough to where, this is an experience that you didn't have, and they did. I've had the converse happen where, I've tried to refer to things and people have no idea what I'm talking about. And, well, okay, well, that used to be true, but I guess I've crossed a boundary here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of that kind of stuff happens. But I mean, the best part about it is that there's very little things that I think about in the past anymore. And so I have very few things that actually are pulling, on me in my health. And so I don't really live as much in the future, but I really live in the present moment. Like right now I'm seed collecting heirloom seeds for a reason. We may need them in this reality because they're projecting and creating a famine. And they're also, destroying, all the things that we would need in order to have the story that we could go into a store and, buy food or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the thing that I like the most about it is the present moment, because I love finding a new heirloom tree right now. I love going out every day and hunting, for apples and peaches and pears and all this other stuff. And then, figuring out how I'm going to, approach the people of the house and, and go in and, get those pears or whatever else, and then get them home and see what's inside of them, like a mad scientist cutting them open and looking in there and, what have they got, and, taking care of them and getting them dried and putting them into storage. So instead of, becoming like this rescue thing, this, terror thing, there's not going to be any food, it's actually become more of this enjoyment process this time of year, collecting seeds, looking forward to the fall because, oh yeah, I get to do a lot of plant medicine collection, making medicines. And oh yeah, I get to collect heirloom fruit tree seeds, right? So it becomes like the present moment just becomes this beautiful thing and this excitement thing and living in it versus, hitting it in survival mode or in the past or hitting it in the past or hitting it in the future where I'm not actually there.
Right. Because that's living in nature, right? Living, off the bounty of nature. It's part of the cycle of nature is.
And I think, I think that was the first program that was actually established here. Like we want to talk about everything as computer programs, but I think it was the first. The creator was the developer of the natural world here and all the things of nature, and that was right. The co-creation.
The
and
true
that we,
creator.
Yeah, and that we
Not
were
the type.
Yep, nope, and we were supposed to learn from the co-creation, which was nature, on how to be, right? And how to co-create and how to live simply. I mean, think about it, like if everywhere around you grew food, that just would not be an obstacle. And then think about
that's the Garden of Eden. That's where we came from.
You wouldn't need a job because it would be abundant for everybody, and it would be abundant and seasonal. But the more that they create another spell called roads and
Mm-hmm.
concrete and pave over, the more you have to pay to exist in this world,
Well, that's
which is the
exactly
spell.
it. But I mean, like food anxiety is kind of the original. That's the origin of the contrivance in our world, right? And that's another thing that Don Juan talked about with the flyers is that, I bet you haven't gone hungry a day in your life, but you have food anxiety because the predator's mind is constantly afraid that it'll be found out and its food source will be cut off,
Yeah.
right? Well, that's exactly it. So we start with food anxiety and we start hoarding food and keeping it away from our neighbors and not, sharing with our tribe and whatever. We have to come up with a system whereby, you have earned the right to this amount of food and we're going to guard it with weapons. Um, and then the financial system becomes, this thing which creates artificial scarcity and is basically designed to steal wealth, to steal from the abundance of what the earth has to offer away from our fellow people. Because now all of a sudden this food anxiety has put us in competition with one another instead of living cooperatively as the
And this,
creative problem solvers we were meant to be.
right. And this also goes into this, it also plays out in a way that people think's positive in this new age thing, where you have people who are channeling information, right? And they're the keepers of this information, and they're sharing it with you. And anytime that you have these hierarchies that start to come into place, and then you have these singled out people that are delivering information or whatever else, it can also be twisted over onto a positive side, or people see that as a more positive side, but it's the same exact thing. And I was talking to a native friend of mine, medicine person, and he was the one that actually said, we've got in the Bible and in religion, organized religion, we have the rapture. He said, and then now with the new age stuff, they have ascension. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, but us old time, medicine people who've studied with these people, we know it's the great harvest.
Right.
And so, it's the same, and really started to help me see that it's all the same thing. It's just people that are standing underneath the rapture, they have their set of rules and beliefs for everybody that, will apply. And they make it out to be such a bad thing that you get left behind. But like, some of my shaman friends said, hey, it might be the best possible thing if you get left behind, because you may not want to go wherever those things are taking you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm adamant about that. People are like, well, wouldn't you go in a spacecraft if the whole world was falling apart? I'd be like, nope, because maybe I can end the cycle. Nope, I would die. I ain't clinging on to anything. I'm here and that's it. Right? And if it absolves me from having to relive the cycle because it doesn't exist anymore, that would be even better, right? Instead of getting onto another craft or whatever else, because people are, the savior symptom is coming back, right? The whole savior program is here. And yeah, wherever they're going to take you is probably, that fairy tale into the
I'm
sunset.
reminded of this old Twilight Zone where they make interstellar contact, right? And there's this whole, but they've broadcast these alien beings have broadcast some message to the Earth, and of course it takes the scientists a terribly long time to decrypt the alien language and translate it, and they get the title. It doesn't take them too very long to to get the title, and it's to serve men. And the aliens show up and they start taking people away in spacecrafts, and everyone's overjoyed that they're, being ushered into this new, greater technological, greater age of understanding, whatever. And then the rest of the book starts getting translated. They realize it's a cookbook.
I think I remember that, right? They're taking him away to make a dinner out of him.
Right.
Well, that's not far off from the truth. We are kind of, more a commodity here. And everything, especially our economic system, because of our birth registration and all that, turns us right into a commodity that they own. So, there you go. We think we're so different than animals or cattle, and we think, oh yeah, we're going to rage against chipping. Well, they chip all kinds of herd animals. They've been chipping, if you have large amounts of cattle on an open range, you're forced to chip them to make sure that, your ownership, you own them all and nobody gets one of yours. So, I'm sure that there'll be a nice level of people that get chipped, but I'll be hiding under a rock during that period.
We'd like to, people don't like the comparison, but if you look at their behavior, they are exactly herd animals.
Oh yeah, no, you know what? I had this weird moment about, 10 years ago, and I had to go into, I think it was like a Walmart or something like that, maybe Target. And I went in, and there was like a Starbucks thingy. Then there, you get your little card or whatever. Then there's on the other side, there was the customer service. And I had totally forgotten what I needed to get in there. So I was trying to collect my mind because there was just so much stuff there. It's like kind of like shoo, 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 things flying by you, at Mach speed. You're like, oh, hold on, Scotty, Mach 5. So I remember like standing there and just looking around kind of like mindless, trying to recall what I needed. And I was like, oh my God, this is a cattle feedlot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, they have the rows. It has arrows on it, right? Which direction the traffic should go. Then they have the little, special danglies for you to know that you've gotten so far through, to encourage you to keep going as a cow, right? And then, to get to the feed, I said, but this one, they actually make you pay to exit the feedlot. So they route you into these little pay centers so that you could pay to leave that particular feedlot. And it really kind of changed a lot of the way that I looked at the reality I was living in. Roads are just, feedlot lines, getting the cows that are, human cows that are in the cars to go in certain directions, right? But everything, it's a, it's 100% control grid. And you are living your life like a sheep or a cow because it's mindless. You just, follow along, just like cows and feedlots. The structure is so small that they can only walk in a certain direction and they can't walk backwards. They're constantly pushed forward. And then when the other gate opens, they're kind of forced in that direction. There's no other direction for them to go. And more, especially I see this happening in Reno where they have these developments. Used to be that they'd build houses and there was always a way to get through the houses to like a dirt road and go through the desert out into whatever. But nowadays they build these, housing developments with all of these, brick fences and everything else, like keeping you from going out into the desert once you get to the backside of them. I mean, it's like it's constantly detour, detour, go only in this direction, detour, go only in this direction, until, like you were talking about earlier, you give up you have your arm twisted in the spell, under the spell in the story, that you just give up.
You accept that this is what the world is, and anymore people don't even see nature anymore because they're just so preoccupied staring at their phones, or they're living not even in this prison system, but in the digital prison system. They've abstracted away from even the physical world to where they're living their real lives on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you had any doubt that we were herd animals at all before, this whole COVID-19 bullshit has just demonstrated it to the entire world.
Oh yeah. They can like a feedlot. They can stop feeding you at any time.
They can force you to wear shit over your face. They can, and people will just comply.
Yep.
They will not ask questions. Oh, it's science. Okay.
Well, what's funny is you're like me. You're kind of, like I ask a lot of questions, and sometimes, I get instructors that don't really like it. And then sometimes I get really good teachers that are like, oh, that's good. That's something to think about. Put him on the spot, to see what they really think and feel. But most of the time I'll run into a situation where I'll like voice my opinion, even if it's super calm. And the response from other people is kind of shock. Like the look on their face is like, I don't really know about that. Or it can be a little bit of aggressive, like, well, you better think about that. I don't really think you should, attempt to do that. Or we're not really in alignment with that. And so there's always this moment where you have to like constantly re-GPS, your human car moving around, around those obstacles, that you come up against because you don't want to be detoured. You don't want to be detoured and reassigned to, that arrow and that direction, but you decide, that you're going to 4-wheel drive it out of there.
Well, and it's always kind of surprising to me, as a mathematician, being just hyper rational, despite, the dreaming work and different things that I do. I mean, in my normal everyday mindset is very much reason oriented. It's not, I'm not wishy-washy. I'm not, and yet you see how just far from even being rational, even though they consider themselves rational, the actual common mentality, the consensus mentality, the common sense mindset is from being actually rational, is that when, I'll make some very, to me, innocuous statement, some deduction about what's going on, and people flip out on you and they start trying to call you crazy when they're the ones that have gone from 0 to nuts in, 0.6 seconds. So.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking a lot about when you were going through when you were in the graduate program. We went back for your PhD, and
here in Reno.
Yeah, and how crazy it got over an email that.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't defining your fate, right? It wasn't like anything that would have been like super serious, but how Richter everybody got over the fact that you didn't respond to a nonsense email, and that you ended up having to say, okay, well, like, look, I have to abandon this program because it's just so ridiculous that there's nothing to even comply to, and you want me to comply, and then you want me to go get on my hands and knees and beg for forgiveness to this person who's not really significant or important who sent the email.
Well, that's the thing, is that it's the same as anywhere else in academia. It's not
but I mean, it's worse than actually the public.
Does the research. The administrators are people. They're, they may have gotten their degrees in whatever they taught a bit, but they're not. They're it's a crony system, and it's not it's really kind of the dregs that get promoted up to the places of authority.
Right, but I mean, the thing that kind of shocked me, I guess, is that, you know, I guess I thought that, there may, as you get higher up in the education echelon, that there may have been like more democracy, let's just say that, than comply or don't comply and get the hell out kind of a thing. So it was more draconian, I guess,
Yeah.
than public. And so I was kind of shocked about that because, I have a big education, but it's piecemeal together, doing, studying exactly what I wanted to study along the way. So I haven't really had to deal with that. And so now I'm starting to reevaluate, people that have PhDs and who have doctorates and all this other stuff, and thinking, well, you guys are just the largest compliers.
Well, in some
You're
sense,
like
I
the
mean,
more mind control part of the population. You shouldn't be like deemed as, intelligent and, like on a pedestal, or that you should be the authority. You're like the worst case scenario as far as mind control.
yeah, in a lot of cases. I mean, because, you even think about the education system, what a lot of it is, um, I gravitated toward mathematics because that was something that I could just reason through and think for myself to, prove everything, to myself so that I understood it and I could use it without having to revert to, memorization and taking it at face value, or taking on faith as dogma. But that's mostly what education is. You must memorize these facts and never question them.
Yeah, well, that's how medicine is. All the medicine programs, it's all about learning all the Latin terms of everything that goes on in the body. And then they test you on it. I mean, you really don't, learn anything really important or significant. And you sure as hell, even if you are in those, there's protocol in medicine. And even, the doctor has to follow protocol. They're not allowed to just go out of the box, They're not
right.
allowed to just.
Well, and that's how the CDC and whoever has controlled this whole thing, because doctors don't have the time or energy to dig into the research and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't like well defined or real at all. They're forced by the protocol set forth by the CDC to say, oh, well, you got this test that came up positive, then you have COVID-19, and that's what's going on the death certificate, right?
Yeah, because and we hope that you get, we hope that you admit it to the hospital, because then we can kill you, and then we can put it on, your death certificate as the number one thing that happened to you. Even though we killed you and it was a mistake, we'll still say that it was COVID. All right, so do you have anything that you want to close up with in the next 3 minutes? And we can come back and have another conversation about this, because there's a lot to talk about in regards.
Yeah, and you kind of wandered off track toward the end there, but I think I did make a lot of the points that I was trying to. So okay, let's just talk a little bit more about contrivance, and how that is actually, it's the fruit of knowledge, right? It's the thing that causes the fall of man, which again, I don't like this whole idea of the fall of man, the original sin, the idea that human nature is fundamentally flawed. No, your thinking is fundamentally flawed. If we lived according to nature, we wouldn't have the problems that we do. It's because we try to contrive our way of life in opposition to nature, right? The whole Epic of Gilgamesh, we think that we live in, some sort of war with nature. And so we always think that, oh, well, we can, arbitrarily make up some bullshit for ourselves to live by. And that's, we know better than nature. Well, that's saying we know better than the creator. And that's fundamentally, if you think back to what I was talking about, Kronos, the tyrant, Satan, well, even the Christian mythos of Satan is that he thought he knew better than God, that he thought he should be God. And then he became, again, the imposter deity, the imposter creator, put himself up as God, tried to cover up the fact that there was a true creator that was, larger than him, and contrived a system, which is the system that we live in, which is what government is all about. Government is just a reflection of the tyrant system, this mental contrivance to where we try to spell out in words, in nonsense legal languaging, that you can do this and you can't do that, and everybody's forced to walk between the lines, and we become more and more like mindless automata, where the humanity is getting drained out of us, and we might as well be robots with no consciousness whatsoever. That's where this contrivance leads us, and that is why this world tends to be considered part of hell. And again, it's not that it is hell. If you look to nature, you see the reflection of heaven. But if you look to the world that we have built for ourselves, you see the reflection of hell. And it is all contrivance. It is all this hubris that humans think they know better than nature.
Yeah, I agree. Even in medicine and lots of other stuff, they're constantly telling you what you are, what your limitations are, what your abilities are, what the rules are, what your body does, what the law is, and all this other stuff. So they just set up a lot of these parameters that make it easy to be under a spell and sleepwalking, so that you don't actually have to do anything or think, once you've had your arm twisted. But so that you don't ever know, your billion-year-old self and all the things that are in it. One of the things I read in this book that was written by a woman who in 1947 had telepathic, there were basically one gray extraterrestrial that was still living from the Roswell wreck, and she basically had transcripts of what the gray ET telepathically told her. But the government never asked for, because they recorded everything, they never asked for the paper transcript. So this woman ended up holding on to it. And it was like 8 months, I think, of her talking to this gray ET before they decided to kill it. And all of the things that the gray ET said. And one of the things the gray ET said was that Tesla's mind could not be silenced, and that as a infinite being who had lived in multiple planets, and he was exhibiting 800 billion years of information that he had assimilated across planets and worlds. And that's the stuff that he was developing. But the ET said, but even what he was exhibiting and remembering from his past and he was developing here was still a very small fragment of the potential and possibilities.
Yep. And we confine ourselves to these tiny little mental prison cells of who we think we are and what we think we are meant to be. And we should do this and we shouldn't do that. And oh God, we deserve punishment because we've stepped outside the line.
Yeah. Well, so one of the new legal words, and then we'll end it, but and we can talk about this. So, I'm working on my own, paperwork, kind of, adapting a different type of paperwork and going back to, who am I? And so one of the things that I like to use as a legal terminology in my legal documents these days in my standing is I'm the origin.
Yeah, the source.
The source, the origin, the original depository, the depositor, and using those words to actually define myself as I truly am, in a world that has, other ideas and definitions about who I am.
Right. Because you look around and all you see are facsimiles. You don't see the original. You don't see the source.
Yeah, but I can
You
still.
see carbon copies.
Yep, exactly. Yep. All right. Well, thanks for having this talk. And like I said, we'll have another talk in the future. It's been Ryan Hunter and Bridgette Dolgoff.
Thank you, Bridgette.